absorbent use of energy, and cities will not be able to grow if the demand on our energy systems continues to be depleted.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and we've got back with us today Ilka and Mary. Ilka, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Very well. I just went to the Sustainability Symposium here in Philadelphia yesterday, and it was a great experience. Nice.
And Philadelphia is, of course, ramping up for hosting Greenbuild later in the year, which is, when's that, November?
Yep.
So exciting stuff there. Mary, what have you been up to?
Just catching up with everything and getting ready to head off in a couple of weeks to the Retrofit Canada conference in Vancouver.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's relevant to today's topic slightly, because we were talking about some good stuff going on in Canada, and retrofit always seems to be increasing interest, which is really good. Zach, you've been pretty busy too.
Indeed, yeah. We just had the Reimagine Buildings Prefab conference that Ilka was a featured speaker at, and that was really fun. And I get to go sailing later today. Oh, nice. I'm really looking forward to that.
Nice. Do you want to mention about
the Humid Climate Conference? Yeah. So that was a couple weeks ago in Austin, and that's put on by the FIAS Alliance Austin, otherwise known as Passive House Austin. Great organization, really vibrant community down in Texas. So, some of the first projects now are completed and being toured in the region. And so there were a bunch of cool, great speakers from that region, as well as from elsewhere, who can share their experiences of doing their first projects in a market brand new to Passive House, how that experience of trailblazing went for them, what they learned from it, and so there was a lot of I think encouraging case studies that were presented for folks who were local. And then this is the second time I've been to this conference, and it's just a really awesome community. The folks in that chapter in Austin are really wonderful people, and they've cultivated a great community there.
Yeah.
So it almost feels like home away from home now, having been there two times.
And a pretty warm home at the moment, I understand. It's getting pretty hot down there.
It was hot. It was hot and humid. It felt like, it's like, wow, I'm in the tropics.
Yeah. I just heard this morning, a little further south in Mexico, is experiencing a pretty significant heat wave at the moment, and a lot of people starting to suffer already. It's pretty early on in that summer season. All right. Well, we've got a great interview this week. We're going to talk prefab, timber and robots. So excited to get stuck into that. But before we do, we've got a few people to thank. Zach?
Yes, indeed. I want to start by thanking the sponsors of the Reimagine Buildings Prefab Conference, given that this episode is part of this prefab series. So a big thank you to Collective Carpentry, Quantum Passive House, and Reframe Systems. And also thank you to Passive House Accelerator's sustaining sponsors. So our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you too to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minotaur, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050.
Great. All right. Ilka, I might hand over to you. Do you want to give us a bit of background on Intelligent City? Have you done some work with them?
No, I have not. I actually didn't know too much about them. Mary was the one who brought them to us, actually.
Oh, Mary, give us the background.
Yes, I had heard, I had talked to them back in, I think it was 2012 maybe. And they were a fairly new company at that time and with a great concept. And what was really exciting about this interview was seeing what they've done, moving that concept into more of a product and a factory that's putting out panelized components. And it's exciting progress to see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's jump into it because this is it's a great chat with Cindy Wilson, who's CEO of Intelligent City.
Welcome, Cindy Wilson from Intelligent City in British Columbia, Canada. I'm so excited to talk with you and hear about what your company is up to. Could you please introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about Intelligent City's vision and the kinds of services it provides?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast. My name is Cindy Wilson, and I am the co-founder of Intelligent City. We have always strived to make living in cities better for people. It comes out of the architectural industry and how do you design better and build better. As part of a long evolution of our company, we have now come to the point where we are producing building parts in a factory with a robot in order to make buildings better, to make them more sustainable, better livable, easier to construct. And that's where we are today.
You founded Intelligent City in 2008, correct? So you've been around for a while. So when did you start thinking about mass timber and passive house construction methods?
Right. Back in 2008, those terms were not part of my world. As I mentioned, we just wanted to make buildings better to live in. And if you want to do that, how do you construct them better? And if you want to figure out how to construct them better, how do you make sure they're within a price point of what can be constructed, that somebody would want to construct a building like that, and that this wouldn't be a building that was, so expensive that it would never be repeatable. And so our first project, which is the reason why we started Intelligent City, was for a 4-story building in Kitsilano, Vancouver. And we started a factory for that and produced our pieces outside, like in this factory. But we knew we didn't have a repeatable product yet, that we were just going to construct this building as a one-off. And so we didn't set up a factory as if it was going to continue on. That's a very expensive undertaking. So we were just kind of in and out. And so that building was constructed for the most part in 2011. And we took these building components that we'd built. At that point, they were 3-dimensional building components. They weren't flat pack as we do now. And we drove them into the city, into Kitsilano, where our office is now. And over a weekend, this building was constructed. It still needed a lot of finishing components done. We needed to stitch it together, as we called at that point, because the modulars were only a certain size. And so there needed to be some infill done at that point. But I think it was the first time that we thought about the integration from design and from being able to inhabit, who was going to be inhabiting these buildings, how best to construct that and make it cost competitive. So that building essentially finished at the end of 2011, and we continued to work, and we learned so many lessons from that. And we continued to work through this idea of constructing offsite, and also being able to, do a multifamily residential building. This wasn't for single family housing. We knew we wanted to fit into an urban environment. And in this case, it was a lot line to lot line building. So there was no setbacks in order to move around. So these pieces had to be very precise about how they were loaded onto the site. And at that point, there was no mass timber for us to use, but we used like engineered timber at that point, thicker components. And it went really, really well. All the buyers that are in that building are the original buyers, so everyone loved the design and loved it wasn't Passive House certified, but it is towards Passive House. It has triple glazed windows, lots of windows, a very nice environment to live in.
Great. And how did your company even hear about Passive House, or get interested in jumping into that level of energy efficiency?
Yeah. Well, my co-founder is German. And so the idea of energy efficiency, and I lived in Germany for a long time as well. So the idea of energy efficiency and actually the cost of energy is just so different in Europe in general than it is here. So this idea of always being more efficient with your energy, or how you construct things more efficiently, has always been a part of our DNA, I guess. And, as we were starting to construct this first building of ours, of course, going to City Hall, they were very interested to hear what the energy performance was. But there wasn't necessarily the framework in place for that to be analyzed as a kind of a repeatable system. They called it their Passive House building. It wasn't really Passive House at that point, but it's as close as you could get at that time.
I mean, so many people have trouble selling the concept of Passive House or energy efficiency, high performance to their clients. How was that an issue for you in the beginning, or was it just, anyway, how was that for you?
Well, it was just something that we knew we wanted to do. And so it became it wasn't an option. We were the developers, we were building it. It just was going to be part of what the building was. And at that point, we also included geothermal system. And so we could convince the buyers that were, in pre-sale, this was all pre-sale, that having these two systems, we could show them what the predicted cost saving was. And so at that time, also doing a geothermal system, let alone, triple glazing on such a highly glazed building, was going to be more expensive. And so we could get buy-in from them, and we gave them the option that the building, and this is kind of this is a concept talked about quite a bit now, but it wasn't back then, that the building could operate as a utility, and you could get charged a similar rate that you get charged from our utility company here going forward, or you could buy into the system. So it'd be an extra cost up front, and then you would just pay what the system would require from the city energy reserve. So that was, when you give it, the housing has typically been made by developers and for the market, to market a product. So when you talk to end users and you go to their pocketbook and tell them what the advantages and what the disadvantages, if there is some, people understand that concept very quickly. And that's the same with these buyers. They understood very quickly, because they liked the design enough and they knew they were going to stay here. And I mentioned everyone has stayed here over this past 12 years. They knew that this was a good thing to do, whether they believed in sustainability or not. It was just good for the pocketbook. And going forward, we've been able to convince developers now, because the framework within different municipalities is also giving you benefit for that. Like they can give you extra height or extra density. So it's, when you think about market housing, when you are not talking directly to the end user and you have to convince a developer, first of all, to go ahead and do this, it really does need that as incentive from a municipal level. to show them why they'll get more if they do this.
And then because you went with a slightly different way of construction, going a little bit more towards the passive house construction methods, was that also then a reason why you started thinking about prefabricating those components because you had a little bit more control over the product? Or where did the prefabrication part come from?
Well, I think like leading up to that time, essentially leading up before the 2008 financial crisis, there was a lot. I mean, offsite construction has been around for a very long time, and there's been attempts at it continually over the past 100 years or so. And just pre-2008, there were quite a few prefabricated companies. It was more for single family, so doing a multifamily residence was pretty unique. But I guess we just thought about having more control in a enclosed environment. And I mean, on site, you can kind of beef up your insulation as well. But then you have to design for that from the beginning. So we knew that if we were designing, we might as well do it in a factory as well and make sure we can do everything we need to, like making sure that the window seals are really, really strong. We had to get testing for that. So it just kind of made sense to do, and these modules were repeatable. They were different on the interiors, but they were repeatable. And we were always interested in being able to repeat things because if you're finding out one-off solutions, it's really hard to then convince the next person, well, this worked there and it should work here because buildings are all different. So it was just a way to think, how can we do this in a more systematic, predictable way, really?
Yeah, it seems like you learned a lot from that experience because now looking at your website, your process, your approach, your product is quite different. So yes. What did you learn and what was the focus, going into this big endeavor first?
What didn't I learn? I don't know. The building was very successful. It won architectural awards. It got a lot of recognition for what it was trying to do. But unless you have buy-in from the industry, you're sitting in an island. So surprisingly, that's one of the things that we learned a lot from. How could you get buy-in from an industry? How could you deliver better? Like these were three-dimensional modules for our first project. So they had to be shipped in through the city, in the middle of the night and have a staging area. So it was a lot to do. So right away we thought, why ship air? I mean, unless we want to just work in Vancouver, why ship air? So that we went to a flat pack panel. But I think one of the things we really learned about was how buildings are financed. And when you do a prefabricated model, when the banks will sign off on that product, back then was not really accepted. Like they don't want to sign off on a product until it's delivered on site. But if you're prefabricating, you're buying materials, you're building these things, you're out a lot of money to begin with. So we had to work with bankers to figure out how we could get the money in because, you're just out for a long, long time. Yeah, I mean, how do I begin to this is how things get approved? So we had to work with building inspectors well in advance, because you're prefabricating these things. And of course, they want to see it on site. So at the beginning, we couldn't close off any of the connecting joints, any of the plumbing joints. We had to leave everything open because they still wanted to come in on site, even though we had brought them out to the factory and they could see it. Of course, they want to see it on site. So how do we avoid that? Well, we get CSA approval on our systems now. So when building inspectors come in, there's certain parts of it that they can say, okay, you're approved, you've been tested, we don't need to do that anymore. So I guess in general, we just try to take as much complication away from it to make sure people feel comfortable that what we're doing is approved on a bigger scale. And that means financially too. That means being able to get whatever financiers are on board to know that this is why we need to charge earlier, and maybe it's only a proportion, but yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And we actually ran into this early on as well with the work that we do. And I almost forgot about that because in the beginning, that definitely was an issue. And it's not only, I'm saying only, but it's about materials and the work that goes into fabricating, but also the design, because with prefabrication, there's so much upfront design work that needs to be done. And those people have to be paid as well.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. All the upside design work is so that you don't get charged later. And this industry works so much on change orders because buildings, once you get financed, you try to build as quickly as possible. And not all the designs may be done. So concrete is being poured, the design isn't done, so they have to go in and pour later, or there's change orders. And that is a very unpredictable and expensive process. So I always think if you can convince people to pre-plan, you'll have less problems later. And I guess that's kind of one of the biggest advantages of our system is that everything has been pre-planned. The specifics of the unit layout are more specific to whatever a developer needs for their pro forma or whatever they'll need to get, affordable housing units included in market housing. That we can adjust as we're going along the way. But other things have to be pre-planned, how plumbing works, how the vertical stacks work, how the structure works and everything. It is all integrated into our system. And I guess that's really one of the advantages of having a prefabricated CSA-approved system is that there's so much pre-planning that has already happened. So it's not on the back of each individual developer or, whoever is going to be building these buildings.
And just for our audience who's not Canadian, can you just briefly say what CSA is?
So CSA is the Canadian Standard Association, and it means that we've had to go through lots of testing to make sure that this is a product that meets different sort of things. With mass timber in particular, it's how do you make sure the building's not going to burn down? And, so we had to go through different testing to make sure that the amount of char that happens on our panels does not, compromise the building. So I think I've been told that the closest thing is kind of like a UL equivalent, not specifically, but towards that. And I was also told it's an ASTM testing. We've had to go through similar testing for that. So it is applicable in the United States.
Right. So jumping many years ahead, actually to this year in February, your company opened up a manufacturing facility in Delta, British Columbia, which is just south of Vancouver. Can you tell us how, because it's a big leap, as you sort of hinted at earlier, big investment to open up a factory, big leap towards assuming that the market is going to be interested in your product and that you're going to have enough demand to justify this investment. Can you talk about that a little bit, your process leading up to the opening of it?
Yeah, well, we opened the factory officially, I think it was 3 years ago. And since then, we have installed our robots and, a milling center, and we've had to get everything ready in order to be manufacturing ready. And that actually takes a long time to commission these robots and make sure our code is working towards the robots. And you have to practice and, go through everything. So, it's been a long, long process. And you're right, it is very capital intensive. And we have investors that support us through that. We have goals and targets that we have to make in order to be manufacturing ready. But we're producing our first panels. They're going to be installed within the next week or so for a project. It's not our design project. We've come in kind of partially through to make it our passive house building with our product, our facade panels. It's a big, big leap to get to manufacturing. Whenever you're making something physically, there's a lot of parts that come together. So we're very proud to get here. We just got to hang these panels and keep on going. And, I think when you talk about the market, where is there not a housing crisis in North America, in any big city? And with the way the demographics are shifting, people are moving more and more into cities. Cities are getting more dense for economic opportunity. And so how are we going to learn to live in cities that are comparable? North America is a single family housing model. And I think everyone, always dreams of having the single family house, and it's got qualities that people want. How do we make sure that when we're building in cities in more dense environments, because there's a lot of advantages to that too. There's a lot of advantages to live in a city. How do we make sure that people feel as comfortable in their homes as they do in a single family house? It's not going to be the same, but how do you make sure you have enough light? How do you make sure you have enough cross ventilation, that you have enough privacy? The sound is, that you feel comfortable. You're not inundated with too many people around you. How do you make for a kind of a friendly community? I always call these buildings, they're really micro communities. So how do you make sure that people learn to live well together?
So that's basically how you look at your kind of product, right? You have the product of these wall panels that you just said you work with other architects or builders to basically use your product in that way. But then you're also looking at it, what you just kind of explained, very holistically, where you are, I assume, the architects and developers on your own projects. Is that
No,
correct?
we're not the developers. We have a few projects in the pipeline right now where we have either come in to assist the architects, because once you start designing for manufacturing, they designed a building that would have been built out of concrete. The economic numbers in this economic environment are not working that well for concrete, especially within a certain range of, say, 7, 8 to 12 stories to 18 stories. That's not an ideal building height for concrete. So we've had developers come to us and say, okay, this isn't working. We want to change it to rental housing, because there's different incentives. There's different lending incentives to build more rental housing, at least in Canada, in certain areas. And so how do you switch that? So we've come in as kind of the design assist to make the units more efficient, to make the building more efficient, to kind of make it a little bit tighter in its design. So we've come in on that, and we are essentially would have the contract to build the superstructure. So it's facade panels and floor cassette panels, essentially, that would make the building above ground, let's say. Yeah.
And then to assist you actually developed something that's called Platform for Life. Can you explain what that is?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a conceptual idea about how do you let people live better in cities? How do we create a platform for people to have what they need and also being able to individualize their own homes as well? So having a flexibility in how you design, but also the specific requirements in order to build offsite. So that's what Platforms for Life is. It's like a theoretical concept as much as it is a physical concept of what we make. So when we're assisting, we just use those two concepts as best we can to make sure buildings can get built.
It seems like the Platform for Life is some kind of software assist for you. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, we've developed in-house software, so we can go from designing and working with developers in order to maximize their performance, because that's what a building is initially. Will this make sense economically for a developer? The world is changing a little bit too, because as I was mentioning, the market housing development is just so different from designing for rental or for nonprofits that will own rental units for a long time. It's a really different concept. And it's a concept that is a little bit more inducive to think about sustainability, because if you're going to own a building for a long time, you care about its maintenance and its energy usage and everything that comes with ownership. So it's a little bit different of a model when you're building rental units. You can kind of build them more resiliently, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a big difference when you're talking to companies that build and flip versus companies that build and hold, or institutions that build and hold. And one of those is I assume, is the Vancouver Native Housing Society, which I understand you're doing a project for. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and how you guys got involved in it?
Well, we got involved because we were asked, they needed a facade panel that was passive house ready. And there's not a lot of competition in that market right now. And so they came to us because we could offer that. And they also had a very specific requirement as part of their branding. They want to have a big basket weave along the facade that alludes to native handiwork and crafting. And so that's what we've been able to do. It's been a difficult process. I won't deny that it hasn't been. It's very custom for our facade panel, but we are learning a lot from it, how things go together and how you make that happen. So anyway, we were asked to come on board for that. And so there's always this, how do you make two systems work together? Because the on-site construction and the on-site construction was not our system. So how do you make sure these two systems work together? So there's been a lot of coordination about how our panels are going to be hung. Our panels are very exact, and on-site construction is not always exact. So you have to make sure these two things are going to work together. And it seems to, we're doing all sorts of scanning of the building and everything to make sure that our panels are going to fit as they're supposed to fit and how those connecting points work.
Can you talk a little bit more about basically your product or your panels? So you're making the CLT, the mass timber panels, but then you're also assembling like different layers to that to make a facade panel. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, we don't make the mass timber. So we buy mass timber off the open market. It's one of those things that you can compare prices to, and we try to get the best product at the best price. And we just buy standard product. They don't need to manipulate it for us at all. We just buy standard mass timber product. We bring it into our factory. We have a milling center, so we can make these panels to the size that we need to. And sometimes that's only very small adjustments. And then we use these panels to create our cassette system. And that means that it's two layers. And in between those two layers is the structural system. And we can run services throughout that. And then we also make a facade panel, and those facade panels are a built-up layer. As you say, it's mass timber, and it's the triple glazed windows, and then we have a lot of insulation and the vapor barriers and exterior cladding. So that's what we make. So we have a cell where we can manipulate and inscribe on the mass timber the things that we need or penetrations that we need to make. And then those get removed from that cell into the different cells where the other robots are working.
Is the Vancouver Native Housing Society project, is the construction underway on that? Or when you're talking about fitting, you're talking about the planning to fit, or are you actually talking about fitting physically?
Physically fitting in, yeah. So our panels are being stacked up in our factory right now, the facade panels. So the exterior of the building is being stacked up at the factory right now, and we're just coordinating. It's like, I'm not sure exactly where it is today because this date changes a little bit, depending on what's happening on site. But they're being ready to be shipped, and they should be hung on the facade of the building within the next week or two. So it's very close. It's a physical. From all this conceptual idea over the years to the physical is going to happen now. So it's a very exciting time for our company.
Yeah, congratulations. That's great.
Very much. Thank you.
Just following up on one thing that you said about, we put in lots of insulation. Are you generally building for the same climate so that the amount of insulation you put in isn't going to vary that much from project to project because it's generally the same climate?
So our facade panels can be adjusted for climate as well. We don't have to say that every facade panel has a window in the same location or the same amount of insulation. We can adjust that. We are flexible enough to be able to make buildings kind of individual that way, where the window placement is. That's a little bit easier to understand where windows would be in a building. They're not always in the same location, so we've adjusted to be able to accommodate that.
What kind of software are you using?
Well, we develop in-house software in order to speak from design, and the design reiterations that we do. We've developed it and to our robots. Otherwise, we use, BIM software to build the three-dimensional models. As things are getting manufactured, there's all sorts of checks that you have to make sure that every panel is going to be the same. And so this happens on what is called an Airtable, and it's a huge screen that we have, and it's software. And so you can always sign off on who is making sure that these panels are always made correctly. Because they're CSA certified, we've had to go through protocol to make sure they're always made the same way, even if they're slightly different. And that it's amazing because it can go from design into manufacturing into checking that everything is okay, and then I can go directly to our billing.
I also had another question about retrofits. Are any of your projects, past or upcoming, going to be retrofits, or are they all new construction?
Right now, they're all new construction. I think, especially our facade panels, are just could be really well used in retrofits. And of course, if the goal is sustainability, the best way to be sustainable is to not have to build new, but to retrofit things. And if you think about all the office buildings that are not being used and not being able to lease, it'd be great if we could retrofit them for housing. It's just something we have not gotten into. It's not a big market right now, and we just have to make sure that we're, promising on what we would deliver for affordable housing the way that we've conceived it. But I can see that being a really good market once it's figured out, because we can adjust heights to a certain amount and, how big the facade panels are. It would be a really good market.
This is just a general question about sort of the near-term future for, your market development. Are there any recent or upcoming policy changes that are going to affect your business model, or any cultural or other types of changes that you see?
Yeah, well, the building code is changing in North America, and, pocket by pocket, it's being increased so that mass timber can be higher, to 18 stories in certain jurisdictions. I'm also not the person that follows that policy change. Oliver, my partner, has been more involved in that. But I think as municipalities realize that they have to do something about sustainability, and not only building sustainability, but how do you prevent cities from being heat islands? If you're building glass towers that people are living in, and the heat load is such a drain on the cooling load is such a drain on the electrical system, and then everyone's air conditioning is just creating this absorbent use of energy, and cities will not be able to grow if the demand on our energy systems continues to be depleted. So I think culturally those things are also changing. And as I mentioned previously, at least in the city of Vancouver, there are incentives to build out of mass timber. They accept that mass timber has a lower carbon footprint than concrete or steel. And so they're not even talking so much about passive house necessarily, but building out of mass timber because it's got a lower embodied carbon footprint.
I've been kind of assuming your market where you're selling to is BC, but is that correct?
Right now, our factory is in BC, and we are developing our market here in BC, but we also have a lot of interest, and we're working on projects in Toronto as well. And so our goal in, the short term in construction time is different than short term on an everyday basis, but our short term is to go to Toronto and start a factory there. We have a lot of interest in Toronto. And then, of course, we would like to come to the United States as well. There's just such a need for housing, and an integrated approach just seems to be like a better way to deliver housing faster and more sustainable. And so we'd like to enter many markets. One more thing too that I haven't talked about is a scalable solution too. So even though every housing project is a different project on its own, our system is scalable. So even though one may look one way and be in a certain climate, our system can respond to different climates and different sizes and everything. So it's a scalable system. And I think for governments that are trying to accommodate more types of housing in cities, unless we can find a scalable solution, more than just ours, because we have to build an unbelievable amount of housing, we're not going to get there. Like in Canada, we're already not meeting our targets to maintain housing units for the population growth. So unless we learn how to scale, we will not this will be a continued problem for a very long time. And as a comparison, if you think about if we were to all have to design and finance our own cars to be built, and every car was different based on where we lived and what our desires were, cars would be exorbitantly expensive. We wouldn't be able to just go to a lot and say, I want that car and know what the price is. It just wouldn't work. And that's kind of where we need to get buildings too. So it's more predictable. It's more predictable in its price and the way you build it. So that's where scalability comes in. And scalability also works for a system like this because you can continue to improve it and you can use AI to optimize. We have a lot of data points and AI is really good at absorbing data. So we can optimize our buildings and how they function and how people inhabit it. And so it's a future that is promising.
It's so interesting and wonderful what you're doing. I mean, I'm, as I said in the beginning, just super excited by your business model and, trying to promote that as a concept, because as you say, what North American city doesn't have a housing crisis?
Thank you so much for your time to both of you. Well, and good luck with all your endeavors as well, because getting this information out is really important. It's, it takes a lot of people to make a change in systems. So I appreciate you getting in touch with me.
And that was Cindy Wilson of Intelligent City. Well, let's start again with you, Mary. What was your highlight there?
Well, it was a great reflection on how the market for this kind of approach, prefabricated components, has changed in the time since I talked to them a while back. And part of it, is that the policies in Vancouver are supporting the development of new housing, and so the incentives that they have make the market more stable for prefabricated companies, and that's an exciting change to see.
Absolutely. Ilka, with your experience in this world of working with software, but also prefabrication, what's your take? What do you think? What are you excited by?
Well, I think for me, just I really appreciated how she talked about the financing part of prefab, even like from the perspective of the factory, because we're all trying to make this work with prefab because there's so much potential in there. But I think a lot still has to change to make it a little bit easier for manufacturers and people using pre-manufactured components. So the financing, how she mentioned, for a factory is quite different because the banks don't release, they kind of need to release funds a lot earlier than on a regular construction site. And I know that's definitely something that some manufacturers kind of struggle with, like payment schedules, like aligning payment schedules with their expenses is a little different, and it's a little more difficult to do that as a manufacturer. And I mean, from my perspective, because we do a lot of upfront design work, so that is usually not really part of an upfront cost as well. So there always needs to be quite a bit of a discussion either with the client to make that work, or for the manufacturer to just kind of have their financing in place to make it work on their side with, banks that are giving out more traditional loans and, releasing money that way. And the other thing that I really appreciated was her talking about the basically the certification of the panels themselves, because I know that also from our experience. Once in Pennsylvania, I actually can't talk about how the process is in Canada, but for us, once you build a closed panel, it falls directly under the it's called the Modular and Industrialized Housing Agency, or under that umbrella. So then you have to meet all the requirements that modular housing has to meet, which means a huge amount of third-party approvals and quality assurance, and even the third party has to be approved and licensed. So there's a lot of things that are kind of happening behind the scenes, and I liked how she brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like they have done a lot of that hard work, and I know that I'm talking to other prefabrication providers, modular providers, that is often a part of the process, where it might even be getting someone from whoever needs to sign off the building to actually come into the facility and see what's being done and establish a level of trust and maybe formal approval of the system, because they are changing the system. They're changing the way things are financed, the way things are delivered, and there's all these other things that have evolved around a more traditional way of doing things, which need to be amended to accommodate for that different process. Zach, what did you think?
Oh, it was great. And I felt like one of the takeaway quotes that kind of is just at the essence of the reason that prefab is interesting in this whole project to decarbonize buildings is that always looking for ways to repeat things. Mm-hmm. And, that's where when we can do that more and more, then we're able to bring costs down and find new efficiencies.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as I try and think of other analogies other than a car, it's so apt.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And when Cindy brought that up, as to think how expensive cars would be if we designed each one personally, and for the location that you were going to use it for, it's so true. And that's why it often comes up is this comparison between the way we build cars and the way we build houses. There's a lot. I mean, there are differences for sure, but there are definitely ways that we can learn from that standardization, but still with an element of customization and have mass customization. I really like the emphasis that throughout the interview, Cindy talked a lot about bringing people into a more urban environment and having them more comfortable living in a city and giving them all the ththings that they think that we think that we want from a section with our own house and standalone house with a white picket fence, but all these other benefits that you get from living in a medium density or even a high density environment, and having community. Once all your basic needs are taken care of and you feel comfortable, it's still private, it's quiet, energy efficient, all these other things, and it's not just about delivering clever pieces of wood that slot together, but it's about a lot of the other community aspects and of that built environment. I guess the quote that stood out for me is where is there not a housing crisis? And that's something that I can certainly relate to in this part of the world, and talking to people. We've done recent events talking to people. Ilka, Mary, you've been, and Zach, you over in Innsbruck. There are so many places around the world where housing is an issue, and both quality and quantity. So I'm really interested in that, and the fact that we can learn from what's going on in other parts of the world, because none of this is unique necessarily to Vancouver. Mary, Ilka, any other thoughts?
Well, I just want to echo a little bit what you said about, I just really liked her perspective about that the buildings they create are micro communities. And just because a lot of times when I hear people talk about densification and how important it is, I think about, what a strong preference people vote for with their feet to live in a single family house when they can. And that's just so great to be able to combine the community feeling of an urban setting with the comfort that you would get in a single family house. So I do feel that this company is forward thinking, and they're looking at scaling not just their approach, but maybe other factories in the Toronto area they talked about, to pick up on, housing shortages are happening everywhere. So that was kind of...
It sounds like there's demand there. Cindy was implying that they've already got a pretty strong signal that they're wanted over on the East Coast.
So I would actually go back to Innsbruck as well, and just thinking about this community feel, because when I was there after the conference, I actually did this bike trip, the Passathon tour, and it was just amazing because within a few hours we rode by, like, I think it was over 50 passive house buildings, and almost all of them were low density, like multifamily buildings, like 3-story building blocks, and it was very close to this, or it was basically in the center of Innsbruck. Like I think we rode by a couple of single family homes, but everyone else was living in these kind of low density building blocks, and it was amazing. I mean, they're beautiful. Everyone seemed really happy. There seemed to be a really good sense of community. You saw all these kids playing together outside. So I just wanted to back what you and Mary are just saying, because you can actually feel it and see it in action, and it working really, really well in other countries.
Nice. People should definitely check out Intelligency. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it's intelligent-city.com. I'm finding myself getting distracted by looking at robots moving around.
They have great videos on the homepage.
Yeah. So, and I think we've heard a lot of people talk about that being the next evolution of people just instead of building frames in a big shed, but moving more to a production line and robotics and automation. They've also got a lot of information about parametric design. So really exciting to see that actually happening, in the real world. So look forward to see where they go in the future. Zach, what have we got coming up?
Well, this week we have a special episode of Passive House Accelerator Live because it's the 5th Wednesday of the month. So every time we have a 5th Wednesday, we do something different. And this episode will be called the Accelerator Hour. And what we're going to do, we just did this survey of the community asking folks to tell us what was the biggest challenge or obstacle to creating low carbon buildings that they're facing. And we've done the first round of analysis from that survey, and we're going to share that on Wednesday and then have a conversation about how we can help you in the community to address that challenge. And there are a number of top contenders for that. So we're looking forward to getting your help in helping us shape what we're going to do in the next year. And a big thank you to everybody who responded to the survey. It's been really, really interesting to see the responses, and some of them are surprising. So we'll unveil those on Wednesday and get your feedback. And then the next week, we have a 101 series of Passive House Accelerator Live on Wednesday, June 5th. It will be, can we eliminate heating and AC? And that will be with Galen Stengel of Stengel Engineering, who is a top kind of engineering practitioner for a whole bunch of passive house projects in the United States. So it'll be really interesting to hear his 101 version of mechanical systems.
Awesome. And I just want to point out there's some really great stuff on the front page of the Accelerator website at the moment, including an embodied carbon roundtable article by Tim Locke, and also an innovation tour by Bronwyn Barry, and a bunch of other great content available on there. So definitely check that out. And of course, sign up to receive updates from the Passive House Accelerator, so you get those and those articles and more on a weekly basis. All right. Thank you very much, Ilka and Mary, for bringing us another great interview. Really enjoyed that. Thank you, Zach. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.